Okay, we're recording.
Okay, great.
Good. So you see, I have the PowerPoint. I shared that with you.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Part of the plan was each participant was going to identify at least one expected change or enhancement, which this is always a great thing. Like, so when you do your training, I
Mhm.
would suggest using this to make them identify something they want to learn. It
Okay.
makes them pay attention a little bit more, I think.
Okay.
So the values of accreditation, who makes it happen is the lead nurse planner, the nurse planner, and the professional development associate. That is the professional development associate is kind of, it used to be an admin and then support system and all of that. But ANPD came out with a course which helped people who were the admin to be able to better support the nurse planner and the lead nurse planner by looking, you know, over documents, making sure that they're filing correctly, getting everything needed that would help the lead nurse planner. So that's a role that people have.
Right. Within each accredited each institution that's accredited provider.
Yeah, not everyone has it, but
We
it does really help. You have it?
Yeah, we have somebody at an Axle headquarters who, is responsible for, keeping track of attendance and, things like that, so that at the end of the year, when we do the annual report, she's got all the data and, we've got a system where we, house all of the documents should we need them if we're, what do we, what's it called?
Audited.
Yeah, audited.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Did she go through the courses through ANPD?
That I don't know. I
Yeah,
can ask. I'm not sure.
yeah. It's just something to help them grow in their position.
Okay.
So the takeaway message is the value of accreditation helps the lead nurse planner, provider unit offer um, quality education that helps a nurse grow in their professional development, which ultimately, helps with safe patient outcomes and all of that. So that
Mhm.
was the takeaway message, and we talked about that for half an hour. So structural capacity, this is where your orientation for nurse planners might come up, especially with SC2. Um,
What's SC2?
yep, so I'm going to pull up, yep, it's structural capacity 2, it's one of the documents I sent you, and it
Oh,
is the structural capacity worksheet. So all right, so can I just slide this over? Do you see, do you still see the PowerPoint or do you see the worksheet?
I see the worksheet, but yes, I did get this worksheet. Okay.
So this is part of your self-study, and a lot of people use their self-study as a learning manual for others. If you were to walk away from your position, someone should be able to take this manual and look at it and see what you do and be able to at least semi-function in your role.
Mhm.
So SC1 talks about the lead nurse planner's commitment to a learner need, including how provider unit processes are revised based on aggregate data, which may include but not limited to individual education or educational activities, evaluation results, stakeholder feedback. So this really talks about what do you do overall in the course of maybe 12 months to make sure that your learners are getting the education they need. um, is, is that by increasing the number of activities, increasing the different times, increasing the ways that they can access the activities, making the activities more affordable, anything like that. This is what SC1's looking for. So you're taking data from your learners, usually by survey or by word of mouth, water cooler, and all of that, and
Mhm.
then you make changes based on what you're getting most likely. And that's really what SC1 talks about. Um, So do you know where you get your feedback? Do you usually get it from survey results or?
We surveyed the membership, um, and like the webinar committee for an Axel, just surveyed the membership what it needs. We keep updated on the literature relative to simulation about what is emerging, and at the end of our annual conference we also ask attendees to say, what do you need for the next conference or a webinar. So yeah, we do get that feedback loop. One of the things that I need to understand is that, so we have a webinar committee, how do we close that loop? In other words, I need to find out, does the webinar committee, the nurse planner assigned to that, do they look at those evaluations and those data and then use that to feed into, what's next? What do we need to do to enhance learners' needs? So
Yep.
that to me is a sort of a little bit of a missing piece that I need to delve into a little bit more about, what do we do with all these data? How do we do that process improvement cycle? And,
Perfect.
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be perfect for SC1,
Okay.
for when you reaccredit. And your committee can gather that data for you and give you a report. You don't necessarily need to do it, or even your admin development specialist could do it. But you're going to look at that report and you're going to make changes based on the learner feedback. So um, maybe your learners mentioned multiple times that your webinars weren't as interactive as some other people,
Mm-hmm.
and so you might find some more learner engagement strategies, such as polling or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what SC1. So what you just said,
Mm-hmm.
I would actually make sure you jot that down because that would be a perfect for SC1.
Okay.
Because you could definitely focus on that webinar committee for your example.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's perfect for SC1. Um, SC2 is how the lead nurse planner ensures that all nurse planners of the provider unit are appropriately oriented, trained to implement and adhere to the ANCC criteria. So this is where we're going to talk about how are you going to get your orientation plan going.
Mm-hmm.
So the easiest thing to do, in my opinion, is make sure that each nurse planner goes to the website and downloads the free manual. And so they have that free manual. And you got the memo, correct, in your email? The new memo, which stated the revisions to some of the criteria.
I did. I did get that.
Okay,
Okay.
so
So
you
go
would
ahead.
give that to them. Yep, you would give that to them because that's right now, that's just a add-on to the manual until the manual's updated.
And
And
when
then
will that be?
the manual will be updated by January 1st.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because we're redesigning it to make it look a little bit more um, appeasing to the eye. And we'll put all these new criteria updates in there. It's not changed really, it's just some enhancements, some words here and there.
Okay.
But make sure, so part of your orientation might be to make sure each nurse planner gets that manual ahead of time to do some reading.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's hard to read that manual sometimes. Yeah, and they don't know how to read it. So you might want to give a worksheet that has guidance on, look at structural capacity,
Mm-hmm.
uh, then maybe sum that up. Look at education design, sum that up. Um, and then are your nurse planners spread out across a region? Okay.
Yeah.
So I
Next.
would, yeah, I would have a Zoom session like this if you have Zoom or
You do.
whatever,
Okay.
and maybe uh, you can meet one time for 4 hours or meet twice for 2 hours or spread it up even more if you want.
Okay.
But what you do, if you're gonna train someone, first you want to make sure they know about your organization. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what's the purpose? What's the plan of your organization? Why are you guys even accredited? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Then you go into the accreditation standards, make sure that they understand all the EDPs, which is the education design process.
Mhm.
That's really what they need to know.
Mhm.
Um, and then you want to make sure that they understand what your quality outcomes are, which is for you QO2 and QO3, quality outcomes 2 and 3, because they're going to be able to help you gather data for that. So
Mhm.
if they understand what your purpose is, what the education design is, and the quality outcomes, then the last thing you really need to teach them is the paperwork and how do you document what you're doing? Because if they can get the education design process down in their head,
Mhm.
they're not going to be following paperwork, so the paperwork should be easy for them. Um, that's my opinion. I don't know who your nurse planners are, and you'll be able to better assess that. They might need that structure of looking at a document first, but if what we do in the which you'll see when we go through a little bit more of the PowerPoint, we just make sure that they understand the process. And let me pull up my manual here. Just and you know how to get the manual free, right, from the website.
I downloaded it. Yes.
Yeah, and anyone can do that. So I always, definitely have them do it.
Yeah, it's the 2015 manual, correct?
Yeah, it's the 2015. It's been updated a few times, but it's still the 2015.
Okay.
Um, and then, so I would start with, give them the manual, but also make sure that they have the update, that memo.
Mhm.
We made it a little bit easier because what we did, we left EDP 1 and EDP 2 the same,
Mhm.
but we moved EDP 7 up to EDP 3. So EDP 1 is how do you identify a problem in practice?
Mhm.
So that's how they identify. And then EDP 2 is how do they identify the educational need? So problem in practice, and you're simulation based, right? Is that what you said? Yeah.
Mhm.
So problem in practice might be debriefing after a simulation. You notice that some of the instructors don't really understand how to debrief, and so you move on to EDP2, and you know that they have the knowledge of debriefing because there's they lack that skill and maybe or practice. So EDP1, you found that there's a problem with debriefing. EDP2, you've narrowed it down to skill.
Mhm.
And then EDP3 now, which would be EDP7, which is confusing right now, I understand. But EDP3 would say, how do you measure that change? So if I was the nurse planner or, planning this, I would measure a skill change by having maybe a role playing.
Mhm.
So I've already got 3 of my 7 design processes out. Uh, which is just very, we did that very quickly. And, you know, you probably will go a little bit deeper because you know more about that than I do. So you'll be like, well, what about the debriefing? What are we missing here? But you have 1, 2, and 3 all done. Um, and then you go to EDP3, which is how do we resolve conflicts of interest? Most likely in your line of work, you're not going to have any conflict of interest, but you can just have a conversation and you can tell your nurse planners, um, let's have a conversation. Does anybody have a conflict of interest? And the only way I would see a conflict of interest is if you're working with maybe a pump or, a
Or
balloon. Yeah. But most likely you've already bought that equipment or whoever you're teaching owns that equipment. You just want to make sure that no one's getting financial gain from that. Most times it's not going to happen. And you don't have to have a conflict of interest form for each person. You just need that statement that says nobody has a conflict of interest who can control content. And that's a change for some people because a lot of people just fill out that form for the fun of it and put it in their documentation. And you don't need that.
oh.
Yeah, you just need you need a process to tell us how you go about identifying and resolving all conflicts. Um, but you don't need to have a form. What I recommend, and what I recommend that you teach your nurse planners, because this will help you, is if there is a conflict of interest identified, to resolve that, that's when I would pull out that form so you have evidence in your file that it was resolved. And that will help you as the nurse planner know that, okay, we had have identified this conflict of interest, but we've resolved it, and now we have to put that on our disclosures. And I think that that just kicks our mind into remembering instead of just writing it out. But it's really your choice. That's what I recommend you do. And what do you do right now? What's your practice? Do you just,
Everybody fills out the conflict of interest form.
yeah. That comes from, and I don't know how long you've been a nurse planner, but probably,
3 months.
oh, three, oh, okay. About when I first started, it was about 10 years ago. It was just changing, but everyone did a biodata form, which you might remember.
Mhm.
And so that was incorporated into the conflict of interest form. And so that everyone had to have a biodata form. Those haven't been required for about 5 years now. But that's where the common practice of everyone fills out a conflict of interest form. Um, but the process is that we're not looking to make sure that you know how to fill out the form. We're looking to make sure that you know how to identify and resolve that conflict of interest. How you do that is left up to you. Just make sure it's done. So you definitely want to make sure you go over that in your orientation with your nurse planners, because you want them to work smarter, not harder.
Yeah, so that will be definitely an update because everybody does that. So what happens with, so the biodata form, that information got subsumed in the conflict of interest. So if we're no longer needing to fill those out, you don't need any biodata?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, but before you teach this to your nurse planners, look at your process and see what you're doing with that information, because maybe you want it. Okay. And if you want it, that's totally fine. We're not saying you have to stop collecting that information,
Right.
um, because you might need it because you're stretched across a large area, and so maybe you want that information. You do need to make sure that you're vetting everyone on the planning committee, and that's really that conversation that you have about, do you have a conflict of interest? What is your specialty? We're giving the nurse planner more autonomy in that area where he or she does not have to document that, but they need to have that conversation.
Okay.
Um, and I can tell you that we've taught this now for 3 or 4 years, and people still require everyone to fill out forms. And if it's your process, we get it, but we're just letting you know it's not required.
Okay.
Um, so do you have a solid process? I don't, do you have your old self-study that you guys submitted?
I do. We have it in Dropbox.
Okay, so go ahead and read EDP3 at some point and just look at your process to see, do you feel that your process is solid with understanding how to identify and resolve, well, assess everyone, identify a conflict of interest, and then resolve it. Um, if you have a good understanding of it, then your nurse planners will have a good understanding of it because you'll understand how to teach.
Yeah.
Um,
I've perused it, but actually I've only been in the role since July 1st. So
okay,
within 2 months. So, I know it's there. I've kind of looked it over, but I will delve into that to see.
yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a strong relationship with any nurse planner who's been there for a while?
I do. Yes.
Maybe work with him or her just to see what their thoughts
Yeah.
were.
And
Um, yeah.
luckily, the individual who is the vice president for programs for Anaxel is who I report to, and she in a previous role was the lead nurse planner. So
Okay. Good.
that has made it, a bit more seamless. So then I have a meeting with her today. So yeah, that's
Excellent.
really helpful.
All right. And so you may be, I don't know how long she was in the role, but you may find things that maybe weren't understood as we updated, and so you may have new information that you need to provide to them. And in that instance, we'll go to SC3, but you're going to be learning a lot more in your role, and then you're going to have to, I will tell you, because I've been in your place as new lead nurse planner, primary nurse planner, you're going to have to take this information and send it out to your nurse planners.
Okay.
I don't know how your nurse planners are, but I can tell you a majority of the ones that I've worked with are very resistant to change, and you're going to have to really make sure they're doing the job correctly, because at the end of the day, the accreditation falls into your lap. It's not the vice president or the president or any, it all falls on you, because if that accreditation is like, the worst that would happen is that you, when you re-accredit, you'll be provisional, and no one wants to be provisional. And so, and that would come by sloppy documentation from your nurse planners, because we don't mandate that you look at every activity. We mandate that you ensure that every nurse planner is able to function independently. But you can audit, and which I'm sure you know how to audit,
Hmm.
because
Actually, yeah, actually, the way Inaxel has set it up is that the lead nurse planner fills out the option two table. So I actually do look at every EPT and all of the documents. So, we have that system, and it may be a little overkill. However, I think they took a conservative approach to it, which is fine.
well, they did, and so I'm going to tell you, I would leave that out of your self-study, and not put that in there, because what that is saying, um, this falls back to the SC2, is that you're not giving your nurse planners the autonomy to individually implement or design, implement, and evaluate an activity on their own. They're having to go through you, which is acting more as an approver than a provider.
Oh,
And,
thank you.
yep, if that's seen in your self study, you're automatically dinged, and you would fail that criterion, and you don't want that.
One of the other things that they've done, this was before I came on. We had a nurse planner who was particularly weak,
Hmm.
and there wasn't a lot of uh, trust. And so they started the process of having one nurse planner complete the EPT table and then it be reviewed by a second nurse planner.
Hmm.
Now, is that more acceptable to ANCC or?
You know, what you're doing with the looking, filling them all out,
Mhm.
that's not what we like to see. Just don't put it in your manual, or put it in your self-study. But you as a new lead nurse planner can do that, because you're getting the feel, and
Uh-huh.
that might be part of your orientation, is that each nurse planner has to go through you at least 3 times, um, to go through the planning table, so you get a comfort level with how they're doing, and you're able to assess where's their weaknesses, and you're able to provide stronger education where you're seeing more
Okay.
weakness. That would be acceptable. And then so the peer review, definitely acceptable. These are all teaching strategies, but your goal is to have them function independently at some point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a very seasoned nurse planner on the webinar committee and someone brand new. And the seasoned nurse planner has offered to mentor the new nurse planner.
Yeah.
That's fine, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Just make sure on the activity files, there's only one nurse planner stated.
Okay.
We're seeing a trend of people putting like 3 nurse planners on one activity. There can be multiple nurse planners, but they have a different role. One person. So you, as the lead nurse planner, don't need to be listed on every activity form.
Oh, I
You don't. We just need one nurse planner. And you know the requirements for a nurse planner, correct? A BSN or
Mhm.
higher,
Mhm.
um,
Right.
with a knowledge base of the design.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yep.
EDP 3, I think you understand that. EDP 4, which is now EDP 5, of course, how the content of the educational activity is developed based on best available current evidence. So really what this is you're going to give a brief summary of how you collected the data, and it might be literature or feedback, and then you're going to um, give us that data that you have. And
Mhm.
so what people do here sometimes is they just collect the references from the presenter and put them in, and they don't really articulate how that's helping meet the outcome.
Mm.
um, which you guys are probably doing very well because most organizations like yours does really well with evidence. Um, and then EDP 5, which is EDP 6 now, is how strategies to promote learning and actively engaged learners are incorporated into activities. Um, this, uh, which I think that you probably do, but um, most webinars people find a challenge with this. So just make sure that on every activity there's some type of learner engagement that matches with the outcome. What kind of engagement do you do right now? Do you know, or
When you sometimes, I mean, beyond Q&A, for the webinars, I don't know specifically, but for some other programs like the Anaxel conference, break up into small groups and discuss an issue that was related to the presentation of the content. And Axel actually has this really cool, it's called ISEP program, uh, an Axel simulation education program it's brand new, totally web-based. And not only do they have the pre-test and post-test and Q&A, but they have reflective journaling, which I
oh,
think is very, engaging. And it's there are different ways they do that. I have to check about the webinars and exactly what they do, but I did, when I got oriented from the previous lead nurse planner, she talked a lot about learning engagement strategies that go way beyond PowerPoint, but how do you get people to actually think about and try to sort of in real time apply what they're learning, in terms of enhancing their knowledge and what does this knowledge mean to them. So
perfect,
yeah.
perfect, excellent. And then so it sounds like you guys have a great understanding of that learner engagement strategy. So make sure that your nurse planners do by orienting them. But a way that you could provide to the organization is how do you get them to engage? You put part of that engagement into the outcome. So the learner must actively engage in role play. And so if they don't do that, they're not meeting the outcome. Um,
Oh.
so that's how you look at all of this as one big process. And
Mm-hmm.
so you look at what your gap was, what your educational need was,
Mm-hmm.
and how you're going to evaluate it. You want to make sure that EDP 5 really goes with EDP 7, because if you make your learner engagement strategies as an evaluation method, uh, it will help you in the long run evaluate the course.
I mean, what I hear you saying is that from the start to the finish, there's got to be logical congruency.
Yes. Yes, and that's hard for some people. I don't know where your nurse planners lie on this, so that's why it's good for you to get a knowledge base, because it sounds like they might, they might have some areas of growth, because it sounds like they heavily relied on the lead nurse planner before, which is okay, but uh, your job's going to become harder and harder as you grow. You don't really want to be holding hands for your nurse planners. They're there to get those activities done. Um, so yes, like you said, there this all goes together. And so EDP 6 really is the collection of your evaluation methods, your learner engagement strategies, and you're taking that data and you're compiling it, and then you're making um, a narrative out of that data. This course went well. The learner engagement strategy helped the learner meet the outcome. Um, it's more than just a summative data dump. It's a summary of that data dump. And so I have a feeling most of your nurse planners are still just doing a summary of data because this is a newer concept for people.
Mhm.
Summative evaluation used to be acceptable just by summing up data, but we want to know what you're doing with that data.
Yeah.
And so that's the education design process, and you want to make sure when you're orienting your nurse planners, which sounds like they're already oriented, but you're gonna provide an update is what you're gonna do. You're gonna provide an update on on your role, on their role, and maybe the theme will be autonomy. How do I get you nurse planners to be autonomous in your role? I'm still going to be checking up on you by auditing your files. That's always an acceptable practice too for you, is to
Okay.
audit their files. After they've done them, an audit is after the fact. So if someone submits you their documentation and you audit it and then they can't give the program until you audit their file, that's approving, and that's what you don't want to do. An audit would be after the actual activity was given.
Hmm.
So you just need to make sure when you articulate what your audit is, that's what your audit is. Um, and I say that because I see tons of self-studies that come through with the approval audit. Um, but I mean, you'll be able to better assess this, but it sounds like your lead nurse planner before you did a lot of hand holding from what you've told me, which is,
It now that we're talking, it seems to be that way.
yeah,
Um, and I think I think it was related to one nurse planner who, as I was rotating in to the lead nurse planner, this nurse planner was rotating off. So, I think that was sort of the driver, so to speak. I don't think it it was a lot of. Now we have what we call regional workshops, and that nurse planner checked in with her. She's very autonomous. The one nurse planner, the season one for the webinar, is very autonomous. And so there's going to be a total of 5. I've just appointed 3 new ones. So, but I think it centered around one individual who wasn't particularly strong in the role. And I think there was a lot of sort of workarounds to make sure that we were complying with ANCC accreditation. And what should have happened is to ask her to step down. At least that's sort of my perspective of, she didn't necessarily have the competency. So I think a lot of what fueled this sort of over management of the lead nurse planner was this one individual nurse planner's inability to be autonomous and to, do be able to, do the role that reflected, the criteria and the standards with ANCC. So,
yeah.
um,
And your new ones, like you mentioned in her, you're gonna have to give some more attention to, but you should be able to rely on your seasoned ones, which it sounds like you can, to help you with that as well. So, um, when you look at EDP or SC2, it's how the nurse plan is oriented. So I think we walked through that. You're going to design something around um,
mhm,
the EDPs,
mhm.
and then how are they going to remain up to date? You're going to do updates however you want to do them. We don't. Uh,
Right. So I just have one more question I want to circle back. So relative to giving the nurse planners more autonomy, um, should they also be completing the option 2 table, or do you see that as my role as the lead nurse planner?
that's their role.
Okay.
Yep, that's their role to take an activity, design it, implement it, and evaluate it. Um, they should be doing that. With your seasoned, well, it sounds like with everyone, because it sounds like no one was doing this. You're going to have to work with them at first to make
Mm-hmm.
sure they understand it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but it would be, in the hope within 3 to 6 months that they're able to complete those on their own.
Okay.
It would be your role to audit them, sporadically. Your new ones, you might audit every activity they do. And then if you find something that's incorrect, you don't go and fix that file, but you maybe make a note that you educated the nurse planner on this was missed. And when we're looking at your files through ANCC, we like to see that more than we would like to see you filling out that form. We would like to see this area was missed, but you as the lead nurse planner educated your nurse planner, and then you're able to show moving forward that that nurse planner was able to do that correctly in the file. So we're looking for growth mindset instead of um, doing things for them. We're looking for you to help them grow in their role, and that would be better appraised, uh, finding your flaws and fixing them than just having a uh, perfect activity where you were doing all the work for them.
Right. Okay.
Um, and then how do you ensure that they adhere to the criteria? You might audit them, or you might have monthly calls to
Mm-hmm.
see what's going on. Or your planning meeting. You might jump in on a planning meeting once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to be involved in every planning meeting right now?
No, and the lead nurse planner has not been.
Good.
So I haven't, but we do. The lead nurse planner meets with the nurse planners as a group, usually every other month, and updates and expects updates and any issues or problems. And
Okay, good. Um, and
yeah.
then is there a succession plan for the lead nurse plan? Which it sounds like you guys have one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, yep. Sounds like you guys have a succession plan. So that would be your SC2. Um, so your orientation, I would say, really, uh, you would know better how to give that, but I think I've given you the keys to
Yes.
forming one. Okay. Um, and then SC3, this is how the lead nurse planner provides direction and guidance to individuals involved in planning, implementing, and evaluating C&E activity and compliance. So this would be you guiding your nurse planners, providing feedback to maybe your VP on we should be doing it this way. Um, One of the examples here might be that you let every nurse planner know they don't just have to fill out a conflict of interest form for fun. Like there's a reason behind it. And so that would be you providing direction and guidance to make their job easier. Um, I'm assuming they fill out their own conflict of interest forms, correct? Or does that fall with the you too?
No, they fill them out.
Okay. And then some other things here might be incorporating the updates, the revisions that we've had.
Mm-hmm.
You are working with ANCC directly to have a better understanding of your role, to help them understand their role better. Anything like that would be applicable here in SC3.
Okay.
Yep. And so, like I mentioned, I would read over your old self-study and just see what's working and what you could update.
Okay.
I think that would be the most beneficial.
Okay.
All right. So that's the SCs. How do you okay with those?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So quality outcomes. This my computer keeps doing that slideshow presentation. Um, And what's your role at, um, what is it called? Villanova? Are
Villanova. I'm actually a professor and the director of the PhD program.
Oh, awesome, awesome. So you know about,
Mhm.
outcomes and all of
Oh
that.
yeah. Mhm.
So, um, I thought we had. Oh no, this was from the manual. So we had. This has been one of the hardest things for people to understand. And if you look at the current manual, you'll see we had something called 004A and 004B,
Mhm.
and it said list. What does it say? It says submitted list of quality outcome measures the provider unit has collected specific to provider. So we have, it's on page 36, but it has a list of starting, like this is where you start from, but we would get everyone just submitting a list like this where they weren't quality measurable outcomes. And so 004A and 004B, everyone missed on their provider self-study. And then quality outcome 1, 2, and 3 would do poorly because they relate to each other. So
Mhm.
what we did, we took quality outcome 1 and we updated it to be more specific. And what you're doing, you're giving us the process used to evaluate um, effectiveness in your provider unit. However you do that. So if you're looking at your data, like you told me,
Mhm.
it's the overall process that you use to evaluate. And then QO2 is we brought in 004A. So we have QO2A and B. And QO2A is asking you just to give one quality outcome measure that's specific to your provider unit. And that might be, it would be increasing the number of activities, and we kind of talked about this earlier, but increasing number of activities, maybe adding 2 new nurse planners so you have more strength in numbers, whatever you want to do over the next 12 months. And
Okay.
then QO2B would talk about that data you've collected and how it's impacted your learners
Okay.
and your provider unit. And then QO3A is the exact same thing, but it talks about nursing professional development. So, what is an outcome that you're hoping to achieve to increase nursing professional development? And an organization such as yours, um, it sounds like it's going to be hard to follow up long term.
Yes. Don't do that. That was a question. Yes.
Yeah, so um, you could definitely add a question to your evaluation on what's one thing you hope to change in your practice.
Mhm.
Um, but uh, what you want to do as a provider unit is look to see what's the hot topic, this 12 months. What's going on in your area that you could change?
Mhm.
So, um, what is the last couple of years, the hot topic has been, the opioid crisis.
Right.
So some people focus on what can they do to change that, and then they maybe increase the number of activities related
Mhm.
to um, working with opioids, working with impaired nurses, and all of that. Uh,
Okay.
so that's really what you're going to do for QO3, and I would avoid any outcome that has to measure a long-term uh, success. I would do instant um, instant evaluation, such as collecting evaluation data over the course of 5 courses, maybe that shows what they're going to change in their practice, and then you're able to take that data and just say that there is an issue with debriefing,
Mhm.
and you incorporate debriefing into 5 of your activities. That's the data you're going to collect, and you're going to say we were able the issue was nurses weren't debriefing, which was not benefiting the learners at the end. So we incorporated at least 10 minutes of debriefing into each of our activities over, 5 activities. We've collected that data and we summarized all of the changes in practice, and all nurse planners, or I'm sorry, all learners say that they're going to always use these three key strategies in debriefing. That might be something you would do. But that's really what the QO3 is. And once you have these outcomes, and if you need help writing these outcomes, let me know. But once you have these, it's very important you let everyone who's in your provider unit know them,
Hmm.
because you don't want to be the one collecting all this data, especially like at the end when you're trying to do your self study. You want other people to help.
Okay.
Um, but this is a change. So in the current manual, this is not how this is. You have to refer to your memo with the update,
Hmm.
um, which I think with the update, it's going to, I think it's really self-explanatory at that point. We took the guesswork out of it for people.
Okay.
I hope is better, but if you struggle with that at all, first work with your VP, because you want to make sure that your outcomes strategically align with the strategic
Right.
initiative of
The whole
your
organization.
the whole organization. Um, but that's just something you'll learn. You already know how to do outcomes. You'll just learn how to incorporate them to show success for your provider unit and for your company.
Okay.
Because your company really, that's all they do is education, right?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So you definitely want to make sure. And this is another like marketing strategy as well, because you're able to show people, your learners, we've done this, we've achieved this, we've done this. So it's very important that we understand the quality outcomes, which uh, I will tell you, this is the hardest part for a lot of lead nurse planners. And it's just because this is new. It's been evolving for the last 5 years. Um, and people are still stuck on objectives. Uh, they still want to do objectives. So there's course objectives, like, and that's kind of the same thing, but it's a meaningful, measurable outcome. The objective, which you already know, but I'll say it anyway. The objective is just what the instructor is going to do or what the course is going to do. An objective does not tell us. Oh,
Okay. Sorry, I'm back.
no, you're totally fine. I was actually signing into the learning community so I could pull up that education design template too. What part did you stop at? Sorry, I didn't see that you went off.
Right. No, you were ending about quality outcomes are much more, they're like objectives, but much more different in
Yeah,
terms.
yes. So the objectives for a course. So remember that we have learner outcomes and quality outcomes. The learner outcome is specific to the course itself, which would be the objectives that you have for your course in your class. So these are the learning objectives for the day, but that is the blueprint for you as an instructor. You're going to go over the five side effects of hypertensive medication. You're going to go over sterile procedure. You're going to do this. The objective is what you're going to do.
Right.
Where learner outcome is what the learner is going to have to achieve um, by the end of the course. And the same so that's the difference between objectives and outcomes in
Okay.
a learner course, which would be your activity. And then a quality outcome, you may have objectives for the course, but really that's what the course is going to do. It doesn't necessarily, just because you list 10 objectives does not mean your learner is going to achieve all of those. You hope that they will, but doesn't necessarily mean they will. Where the quality outcome, it's a measurable outcome. So the learner has to achieve, or the provider unit has to
Right.
provide evidence. And you do not have to meet your quality outcomes. So that's one thing that if you fall short on QO2, that's fine. Just tell us and tell us what your plan is for the next time.
Okay.
All right. And here is just a model. This one, uh,
Mm-hmm.
eh, we used to focus on participation and satisfaction. It used to be, were you satisfied with the room, the food? What we're asking people to do is really start at level 3 and go upward.
Mm-hmm.
So, learning, do they know competence? Do they know how? Performance, can they show us how, or can they do it?
Mm-hmm.
That's uh, there's Miller's model. I forget what model this one's called, but it's from the CME world. But any of these models is what we ask people to look at when
Mm-hmm.
evaluating outcomes.
Okay.
Um, Content integrity, we have standards online which you can pull.
Mm-hmm.
Commercial support is any support from a commercial entity, which is your pump makers, any type of medical equipment used on or by a patient. That's commercial support. Commercial support is not a book or an author or a hospital or a clinic. That's just support. So if you have any commercial support, you need an agreement and it has to be disclosed. You can't promote the commercial support. You can't like have their logo spread everywhere. You just need to make sure that the commercial support is separate from the activity. So if, let's just say, Phillips gave $1,000, you could definitely put, thank you, Phillips, for sponsoring. Make sure that it's on the disclosures that Phillips sponsored, but you don't really want to say Phillips sponsored, so you must go to their booth or something like that, which I think, conflict of interest is a conflict of interest. This means that somebody has monetary gain from the activity. So that would be a company or anyone like that, or a person who works for that company who's going to push a product. Um, that might be a conflict of interest. Someone who's on a speakers bureau might have a potential conflict of interest. Doesn't necessarily mean they would, but you could resolve all of that. The only time you can't resolve a conflict of interest if they're an employee of a commercial interest and it's specific to the course. So if you have somebody working for Eli Lilly, which is diabetic stuff, and they work for Eli Lilly, and your course is on simulations for a diabetic, and you're going to be using a lot of Eli Lilly's medications,
Mm-hmm.
that probably wouldn't be the best fit for them.
Okay.
But if you had that presenter who worked for Eli Lilly and you were doing the key concepts of debriefing, there's no correlation, so there is no conflict of interest. But you might want to assess.
All right. So one situation that has come up since I've been the lead nurse planner is that Axel has an executive director. And this executive director has worked really closely with the content experts and the nurse planners for this new simulation education program that Axel has just launched in July. And she was filling out the EPT table, and she filled out her conflict of interest and identified herself as having a conflict of interest because she was employed by Axel. And I was like, I don't think that's a conflict of interest. No.
No,
Okay.
but it would maybe possibly be the next one, fair and balanced content. She might have a potential. She might have a bias, and you don't want to push a product or anything like that. but
Yeah.
it doesn't correlate. So, but that's what your nurse planners need to understand is people are going to say they have conflicts of interest, and some nurse planners who don't understand that will list that as a conflict of interest on the disclosure, but it's really not. So they
Okay.
need to be able to assess and identify. And like you just did, you assessed and you identified that it's not a conflict of interest.
Mhm.
So you threw that out. That's the purpose of it.
Okay.
Yeah, anybody who works for a company or like that, they have a potential to have a bias during the education, but you have that conversation with them. Make sure it's fair and balanced
Okay.
content.
And
Yeah,
another quick question. So there was a lot of discussion as to whether or not this individual, the executive director, who's not a nurse, could she fill out the EPT table? Some people said yes, some people said no, and they left it to me to ask you.
yeah. So we don't necessarily require that a nurse fills out that form. We require that the nurse plans the activity. So if she's filling out that form, that's fine, but she can't be, filling it out all by herself.
Right.
And a red flag would be that she declared herself having a conflict of interest. Our nurse planner would know that she didn't. So that would be the case where you would probably, or the nurse planner would want to look it over. But all of that designing and implementing and all of that should be coming from the nurse planner. But
And that's what, yes, that was
that's fine. Yep.
the process. Okay.
Yeah, because you know, nurse planners are busy, and someone wants to fill that form out. That's perfectly fine. Just make sure there's a nurse planner on there. Um, if that would be the file that was pulled for your review, just make sure that the nurse planner can speak to it.
Okay.
Whoever wants to fill out those forms can fill out the forms. Just make sure they have knowledge of it.
Okay.
Um, and then, freedom from promotion. So I don't think that you guys would be able to promote anything anyway.
Right.
Yep. Good. All right. And so we kind of went over all of this already. I really jumped into this, but this is all of this here is what we went through.
Mhm.
So you have EDP1, EDP2, and now this is EDP3, and then EDP4, 5, 6, and 7. Do you feel comfortable with creating a measurable outcome for activities? Uh,
I, you mean for each individual educational activity, or are we talking?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, good. Then, I some people will go right into the outcome before they even start planning. And I always tell them they should plan a little bit first because that's going to help them with the outcome. Because if you find that there's a skill issue, your outcome wants to mimic that there's a skill issue. And so I always just make sure the nurse planners understand that. Do your nurse planners come up with their own outcomes or do they come to you for that?
No, they come up with their own outcomes.
Good, good, good. Okay. Um, wow, we went through that really quick. Okay, so here is our reflection, and this is how we evaluated everyone in the course.
Okay.
What did you learn?
What will
What
you?
will you do? That is a self-identifying, but it's self-identifying, and usually people who self-identify a change will carry out that change. So that's how you use that as a practice change.
Okay.
Um, And then how would we know that you're going to do all of that? We're going to know like through ANCC by your questions that come to us and your self-study that we look at.
Okay.
That's how we evaluate long term.
Okay.
Um, and then that was that. So
Great.
let's pull up this. Now, this is something I would encourage you to incorporate. Uh, You do see it developing an educational activity, right? Okay. I would incorporate this into your orientation for your nurse planners.
Hmm.
And before you even pull out your design table, your form
Mhm.
too, go through this with them.
Okay.
So what type of activity are you, like, maybe have break them into two groups, have one do a webinar, one do a live. I don't really know
Mhm.
what works best for you, but walk them through it. What is the practice gap? What evidence supports this practice gap? See where they're getting that evidence from. Um, what stakeholders need to be engaged? So how do you plan um, a planning committee? So you know that a planning committee must have two people, nurse planner and content expert. A lot of times, nurse planner is a content expert. So then that other person, it can be anybody, but they need to have at least two people on.
Mhm.
Um, your presenters do not need to be on your planning committee. Um, it's nice if they are, but they don't need to be. A lot of times you'll see keynotes. They're not on the planning committee. They're asked to speak, but they need to be assessed. What's your target audience? Yours is probably always going to be RNs,
Mhm.
but you might have others. But remember, ANCC's target is RNs. Uh,
Mhm.
and then what is your desired outcome for the activity? Um, you might not be putting that into really in-depth outcome yet, but you know that you look at your gap and you know, all right, this is what we want to happen, and then
Mhm.
you'll come up with a more in-depth as you go on, because then you look at how are you going to measure this, and then that's when I tell people to think about the learner engagement. That's really going to help you measure. And then how will you ensure content integrity? Make sure they have a copy of the content integrity standards. Um, and then how will learners be actively engaged? And what strategies will you use for evaluation? Remember that formative evaluation and summative are two different things.
Mhm.
Um, and then how will you know whether the activity made a difference to nurses or patients? And so this is just a form. We've been using it for the last 2 years, and it helps people out a lot, I think.
Okay.
And I would use this in your orientation.
Okay.
So let's pull up. I have to, so it's ANCC Learning Community. I'm going to pull up the second one, primary accreditation, login. Oh, it's not letting me. Oh, here we go. Do you have any questions that have come up so far? Or are you feeling all right?
Okay.
So you teach at the PhD program.
I do. And usually I teach one course of undergrad research and one master's level course of research as well. But yeah, I teach in the PhD program.
Okay.
Yeah.
I currently am in a DNP program, and I really wanted to get a PhD, but my friend started it at Lord's University.
Okay.
She didn't have anybody, and so she asked me to come through, which they have people now, and I'm a year in, and I'm not. Everyone in my class is in practice, and I'm not in practice. So I'm like, what am I gonna do with this, guys?
Yeah. You would have done best with an EDD.
What's that?
It's a doctorate in education.
Uh,
Yeah, if Columbia is sort of the place to go for that. But yeah, I mean, we have EDDs. We have a few EDDs on the faculty, and they were just solely focused on, education and pedagogy, and But yeah, I don't know how the DNP is going to fit with you since you.
it's really not. But I'm like, I'm already in a year. I'll just do it. And it's where I got my bachelor's and my master's. So I got 13 prior learning credits. So I'm like, I'm just gonna do it.
Didn't have much longer to go then.
No, but I think I'm gonna, as soon as I'm done, I really wanted to get my PhD in nursing ethics through Duquesne.
Oh, I went to the undergrad program. That was my undergrad.
Oh yeah, I
Mhm.
I really want to do that. So I'm gonna see like what I can like, maybe
Yeah,
take away, if anything. Okay, so this is the one that you use, correct?
option two, yes.
All right. So do you want to ask me your specific questions, or you want to just go through it
Yeah,
together?
so scroll down, description of the, um, let's, actually, can you just go up your scroll? I'm
Oh,
not able to keep up with you. That's okay. Um, just so I'm clear, provide a brief summary of the data gathered. It validates this activity. So if it comes from evidence, what you're saying is you just can't list references. You need to be able to synthesize that information, and you can cite the references, but it just can't be from these references. Got it.
yep.
I think that outcome measures, a quantitative statement is how the measure will be out, pre-test, post-test. I assume you're looking for things like that in terms of a quantitative statement, or and so I guess I need a little bit more, and we talked about this, but an outcome measure, how will it be measured? The ability to apply principles of debriefing in a role play situation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And then,
So
okay,
for this one here, EDP, I'm sorry, for E,
right.
desired learning outcome, you want to look at what your gap was.
Hmm.
And so where were they and where do you want them to be? So your desired learning outcome would be that learners, let's just go to the debriefing, just that's all I know about simulation right now. So it's in my head. You want them to be able to successfully debrief by using I'm sure there's a set of principles, right? On
There's
debriefing.
multiple methods of debriefing, yes.
Yeah. So maybe you guys have a method that you really like and you want people to start following that. Your desired learning outcome would be the learner will have an increased knowledge and or skill related to XYZ model of debriefing.
Mhm.
And your outcome measure would be the learner will be able to actively dialogue with a peer um, on one or two methods that they will incorporate into their practice by the end of this event. And
Okay.
so you can, one, watch them debrief,
Hmm.
or you could have them write it down. But that's the actual outcome measure in um, a quantitative
Okay.
statement is they're actually able to get two new principles that they're going to use.
Okay. So I guess when I saw quantitative, my mind as a researcher just went to, it's got to be quantitative statistics, but it,
No.
any form of an assessment that would measure their learning.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
And I think the quantitative statement is there is because um, people struggled with that, where they must have before it was you must have an 80% or higher. There was always these numbers or stuff, and so I think that's why that's there. Um, I don't think the ED or the Education Design Planning one has this. I think this one was split up a little bit more to help people. And so whatever you need to measure for them to change is what goes here. And it can be very simple or very complex.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, but just know that these are together. E and F. Desired learning outcome is that they'll have an increase in a new model. And then F is how you're going to measure that. And you measure that by role play or post test, pre test,
Okay.
evaluation. Yep, all of that.
Okay.
Um, think about I always tell people think about your learner engagement here as well, because that's going to help you measure.
Okay. I'm good for G. That seems easy. Learning, engagement. That's fine. Good there. Um, I guess this is where it's J. I'm like, wait a minute. I think I just already said it doesn't F ask the same thing.
Yep. So F is what is your measure. So yes, you are going to measure if it's knowledge, skill, or practice. But and like I said, this is kind of out of order, so that's why it's better
Okay.
to go how we went. This is just asking you to tell me, is it knowledge, skill, or practice? So you're writing that outcome in this form. You're writing that outcome before you get here, and it's out of order that way. So yes, they are the same, which is really good that you caught on, because a lot of people still don't catch on to that, because they will give me an outcome that's specific to practice, but they just said that they're going to change knowledge, and so they don't
Right.
correlate. So that's
Okay.
good you caught that, but they are out of order. That's why I tell people go through the planning and then fill out this table.
Okay.
Short term, right here, it gives you some stuff. Long term, you really could only most likely do self-report change in practice for your type of organization.
So the VP for programs has had a conversation with me, and she's interested in looking at long-term evaluations. But when I look at self-reported change in practice, that seems to me to be something that you've got to go back, contact the learner who was in a certain educational program, and ask them.
So no,
No, but what you had said previously.
yeah, you can do that. You can reach out to see.
It takes
Um,
a lot of manpower to do that.
exactly. And there's only 20% return rate on
Yeah.
reaching out. So self-report, like there's evidence to show that if somebody states something, they're going to continue doing it. And someone's already done that evidence for you. So if you have someone who's self-reported, um, that's
Hmm.
you can use that as a long term.
So, in other words, if we asked a question on the evaluation part of, do you intend to, change your practice based on the knowledge gain from this educational activity, and they say yes or no, that's good enough.
I would have them say yes or no, and then if they say yes,
Describe how.
tell me one thing. Yeah,
Okay.
because that'll give you more. You can always do return on investment, which would be best for you guys to do. I I tell people take a really important activity and do return on investment. And I don't know if you do a lot of that, but Sue Johnson, she's on our commission. She has written a lot of books on uh, education return on investment models. So I would look at hers, and I try to do one a year if I can, because it takes a lot of work. But that's another long-term evaluation, and you really can just use the data you already have. You don't need to go searching for other data. Um, I'm not an expert at return on investment. I'm really probably horrible at it, but I read the literature and I can follow the formulas and stuff.
Okay.
Um, but this is good for your provider unit and your company, because if you do something that you guys think is important, but you notice you're losing maybe some financial monies, you still might think it's still important for the profession, so you continue doing it.
So I know nothing about return on investment either. So what you're saying is return on investment is how does this benefit the company in Axle financially?
It could do that, or it could be a return on investment. But yes, pretty much, it's what you're doing, and so your finance department knows more about it than we do. But there are some principles that you follow for education
Hmm.
that you. There's a lot of articles that Sue Johnson has written,
Okay.
and I will see if I can find some and send them to you. But uh, it does. It lets you know that, and this was really good for hospitals as well. So the example we always use is um, you have on a med surge floor, you in the last 12 months, you've had 5 CAUTIs.
Mm-hmm.
You gave XYZ education for 6 months. Now you're down to 0 CAUTIs. The return on investment for that education was the hospital saved X amount of dollars. It was a benefit.
Right.
Um, another return on investment would be for an association or a company like yours, where you noticed a trend in some type of issue that was specific to your target audience. You did X, Y, Z. You you changed something,
Mm-hmm.
but you lost money, but
Mm-hmm.
you gained 50 new followers or something like that. You
Mm-hmm.
have to look there. You lost money, but there was a return on investment because now you have 50 new potential clients or customers.
Okay.
So it's interesting. It's just hard to do, and
Yeah.
so you can't do it on everyone. So you might work with your nurse planners and say that they have to do one return on investment for every 12 months, and then you would have five, and then you would be giving your boss tangible evidence of why what you're doing is important or not important.
Yeah.
So that's good. And let me write that down to send you articles if I find them.
Oh, well, thank
Um,
you so much.
yeah, she's on our commission, and if you ever get a chance, she's from Indiana, but
Mm-hmm.
she's just really articulate when it comes to return on investment. I don't know much about it. This option to attachments, this can replace that everyone fill out a conflict of interest form.
Got it.
'Cause this shows that each person here has been assessed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it says, um, so he's not part of the planning committee, but he is on there and it says he has something,
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be evidence that this was resolved. Okay. And that's where you could link to your form.
Okay. And those are the attachments. Great.
Yep. And then the summative evaluation, it's just very important to know that that's more than just the data dump. Um, and then you know all of that. And that's it.
Great.
All
Okay.
right. Okay. Well, do you feel more comfortable or?
This was extremely helpful. Thank you
Okay.
ever
Yep.
so much. So, yeah, I really appreciate the time that you took.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And honestly, if you send me the link, I will listen to the recording a couple of times so that I can become saturated. But that's
Yep. I will. I just started uploading because I could no longer save to the cloud. So
Mhm.
I'm uploading it to YouTube. It takes sometimes it takes 24 hours, but once it renders, I'll send you the link. Okay?
All right. Thank you ever so much, and good luck in your DNP program.
Okay, thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Oh, now we need to leave.